Heidi Fleiss pushed what she called the oldest profession in the book further than anyone before her. From a former Hollywood madam to her plans to own a stud farm, she had big dreams for the sex work industry. The question we need to attempt to answer today is, where did it all go wrong? Friends, associates. Okay, let's have a honey boo boo moment for the end of the year. This is me, just doing a little bit of a drum check on my flab. Charming, charming. Friends and associates, have you ever heard of Heidi Fleiss? And if you have, do you come from the US? Because I think that is the common denominator between the people who know of a person that I'm talking about today and those who don't. Because I like to tell you how I find these topics. Okay. First of all, what you're gonna want to do is in the comment section, if you know of a topic that includes sex or something sexual, crime, any type of crime, that also, third point, isn't grim, that doesn't end up in murder, beheading, dismemberment, cannibalism, all of that, because it usually kind of goes that way when it comes to, like, especially BDSM. If you know anything, like the story that I'm telling today, or like the story that I have told on the documentary Tickled, on the competitive endurance tickling, put it in the comments, because I thrive on those topics. When I tell you, I have watched 2 documentaries, I have researched on this, and then I have also gone to research on the history of sex work. I'm not kidding. We are going before Christ today, guys. We are going BC. It is that deep. It is that deep of a rabbit hole that I have gone in. I could have just like watched E! Entertainment documentary on this and be like, cool, satisfied. Of course not. It's so freaking interesting to me to research this kind of topics, and I wanted to end up on a lighter topic than I usually did. Like for Christmas I covered Elan school. It's not acceptable. Where were you going with that first sentence? I've just cut out a whole 60 seconds of me thinking, where did I start that sentence? This is how talking with me in real life works. It's so freaking exhausting. You were telling them how you actually found the topic of the day. So I was going through the archive of True Crime Obsessed, because they cover documentaries that sometimes I've never heard of in the true crime niche, and that's where I found Tickled. So I saw this one, it was called Hollywood Madam, or like I think they covered the later documentary, like Madam of Crystal, whatever it's called. So I was like, okay, this sounds weird enough, let me listen to it. Then I listened to it. And then 2 documentaries later and a bunch of research and going down into the history of sex work, we are here. Heidi, something tells me, if anything, researching her for days, if I have gotten anything right, eventually, one day, she will probably come across this video. And Heidi, girl, I vouched for you. I wanted this so badly for you. You can't even understand how hyped I was. How much I wanted this to happen. Where did it all go wrong, Heidi? I mean, I kind of know the answer. That's why we are all here. Imagine if this was just like a really shit video where I don't answer the main thing. I'm like, I hand it over to you now and you do the research and tell me in the comments. That would be chill. And then I tell you how wrong you are. Because I have done the research. I'm gonna Hermione Granger this video. You know, some days it's not a day. Some days I just sit in front of a camera and it's like, nope, today I was not meant to be doing this, but here we are, because this is a story that needs to be told. So, Maya is the name. Heidi Fleiss and her life story is the game of the day. The focus of our story today, Heidi Fleiss would always say that she has taken the oldest profession in the book and has done it better than anyone else.
What's the world you conquered? I took the oldest profession on earth and did it better than anyone on earth. And you know, like it to be in there again, well, you see a girl who's 25 years old, who's living in Beverly Hills and making the kind of money I was doing.
Some would argue that the storytelling might be the oldest profession in the book. Others would say, well, Heidi needed builders. She needed somebody to actually be in charge of building those houses where her brothels would take place. But to go 2,400 years before Christ Yes, we are starting off from ancient Mesopotamia, because this is where the word for sex work, the old word that was used, that I will not be using it this time, was first recorded. Then, if you had to place the bet where first brothels would open up, you would probably, judging by how far in history we are going here, say Greece, right? Like Greek gods were famous for being a bit on the hoish side, but no. First brothels were actually opened in China, and then followed Greece. The closer we come to the years after Christ, more regulations started happening. Sex work became a business in itself. In 180 BC, regulations were already in place in Rome. Rent from a brothel was a legitimate source of income, as was procuring the sex workers. Madams and pimps already existed, and they would cut their chunk of money out of what the sex workers they were in charge of were paid. And from the early days that it started being seen as a business, there were countries that were proactively not regulating it. Rather, some of them actually abolished the tax on sex work, meaning that the states showed less financial interest in this area. And what that led to was the harsh punishments on sex workers. They'd always be at fault if anything was to go wrong, and they would always have that stigma surrounding them. So, the patrons, the ones in charge of procuring sex workers, wouldn't get punished, rather the sex workers would. In Spain, around 600 such punishments included flogging, around 300 strokes of those women who would end up being caught practicing sex work, or they would be expelled from town. The aim was always to dehumanize, make them feel less pretty, actually physically scar them, in order for them not to return to sex work. In 1158, Romans who would catch a sex worker would have her nose cut off in an attempt to make her feel less attractive. As if that wasn't enough, for about a century, from 1490, syphilis started spreading around Europe. Once people realized that this disease is venereal, that it passes on from one person to the other, the stigma just intensified. And everything I've spoken of so far, so the stigma, the sex workers being blamed for quite literally anything themselves, for engaging in sex work if it's illegal, and for also spreading diseases, continued further as we come along in history throughout the wars. Even though sex work won't become completely illegal in most states until 1915, it was generally looked upon as a specific sort of vagrancy. It was looked upon mostly as a crime committed by homeless people. They even had a specific term for the sex workers known as common night walkers, women who stroll the streets at night for immoral purposes. And those kind of offenses, when you make them that specific, then become punishable. So Massachusetts from the early times started punishing night walking. And with the emergence of the wars, starting off with the Civil War in 1865, even the red light districts and the brothels that would be established would be ended or shut down legally because of the concerns over health risks to US soldiers. Every single thing from this point on is simply working in the protection of the poor soldiers. That, it's not like they are the ones that are the willing party that are engaging in this. Actually, through history, through this rabbit hole, mostly the ones that are actually hiring sex workers to come to the base to entertain all of these soldiers, and they are the ones that need to be protected at all costs. So certain things that work into that favor are further regulations. In 1913, there was a Bureau of Social Hygiene that was formed, and they were supposed to do research on aspects of sex work like police systems, the need for women police, legal statutes, and court reform, and they produced a series of psychological studies of delinquent women. During the First World War, that just intensified, and the US government developed a public health program that they called the American Plan, and that plan authorized the military to arrest any woman within 5 miles of a military base. If women were to be infected, they would be sentenced to a hospital or a farm colony until they're to be cured. By the end of this war, only over 15,000 sex workers would be imprisoned, and majority of them were never actually thrown into a hospital like this plan indicated. Rather, they were punished for being called upon a military base to entertain these men, or just purely because of stigma and the infection that they had. But now this somehow wasn't enough. They really thought, what can we do in order to prevent sex work from happening? So in 1918, US Chamberlain-Cahn Act was established. And according to this act, the government could quarantine for the protection of the military and naval forces of the US any woman suspecting of having venereal disease. So the discovery of one such infection upon examination is enough to constitute for the proof of them engaging in sex work. Second World War really changed nothing, and here they knew they had to start early, so there was an act established in June of 1941, and this law, called the May Act, was intended to prevent sex work on restricted zones around military bases. But the conditions started looking up a bit after the Second World War, with the combined pill getting approved in the 1960s. In the late 1960s, New York eliminated license requirements in order to own massage parlors, meaning that a lot of massage parlors eventually became brothels. In 1970, Nevada had its first licensed brothel, called the Mustang Ranch, and eventually this led to the legalization of brothel sex work in 10 out of 17 counties within Nevada. Sex work rights groups started forming around the country, and even though ever since 1915 in most counties in the US, sex work started being illegal due to the emergence of the First World War, followed by the Second, the protection of soldiers at all costs, and the outbreak of syphilis, Nevada as a state was always more open to it. Brothels in the Wild West operated since the gold rush days in mid to late 1800s, and as miners started to head to west, the sex workers followed, and they remained welcome in towns where men would far outnumber women. If you think about the places where these miners would be going to do the work, those would be the rural areas of Nevada, and because of that, the sex workers were seen to be important founding citizens of such states. Even today, the sex work in Nevada is only legal in the counties that have less than 400,000 citizens. And this is because once the families started migrating to the west, Nevada lawmakers recognized that they had to regulate sex work. Legislators passed the first sex work control legislation in 1881, giving the county commissioners the power to license, tax, and regulate brothels. And then in 1971, the state of Nevada began to formally regulate sex work, giving rural counties the option to license brothels. Currently, from what I read, sex work is only legal in 8 counties around Nevada. And as mentioned, your county has to have the population of fewer than 400,000 people in order to license them. Based off of the regulations of those counties, the brothels have to have the permit and the license in order to operate, and the county commissioners possess the sole authority to grant and revoke licenses, meaning this is not regulated by the state law, rather by the federal law. After they were to receive the application, the sheriff and the commissioners would investigate the applicant, anybody that would be associated and would be managing the brothel, the proposed location, and other matters that are necessary to the protection of the public good, welfare, and safety of the inhabitants of the county. After a complete investigation, the sheriff would then present a written report to county commissioners, and then they decide whether or not you can actually open up a business. Now, even in the counties in Nevada where sex work is legal, street sex work and pandering remain illegal under the law, and these are illegal also everywhere else in the US. Pandering is procuring. It's what madams and pimps do. It is a provision of a sex worker to a customer. To familiarize you with pandering, as it will become a prevalent point in this story, it is illegal because it's even harder to regulate than brothels. With brothels, right, like there is a whole application, you can go into the background check of the people that are gonna run them, you can then make sure that that person is in charge of testing the workers that work there for STDs, and you can sort of see how those could be regulated. Like, it is hard, but like you can sort of maintain the grip on them. However, when it comes to pandering, you can have things like trafficking. So trafficking a person into a country for the purpose of soliciting sex, because there is no location transporting a sex worker to the location of their arrangement, and finally deriving the financial gain that again can't be as regulated as when everything is on the books. Now that we understand why sex work is vilified in general because of the stigmas, because of the wars, because of how it is portrayed, similar thing applies to pandering. If you think even about how it is portrayed in any series, in any movie that you have watched, you've probably seen some sort of abuse between madams and pimps and the sex workers they're in charge of. This relationship is often understood to be abusive, to be possessive, with pimps and madams using techniques like psychological intimidation, manipulation, starvation, rape, beating, tattooing, branding his sex workers, threats of violence, etc. But the recent studies actually show that these assumptions about the abusive relationship are just stereotypes. These are stereotype narratives that may only represent a small percentage of those kind of relationships. The side that you usually don't see portrayed on TV is the criminalization, how criminal penalties that fall upon those sex workers mostly take a toll on their families. If they were to get arrested and they have children, those children are taken away from them, put into foster care. There's a financial toll where the fines for doing sex work would put people into poverty. They would then end up homeless instead of working under the protection of somebody in a brothel. And most importantly, being convicted of sex work related offenses would then give them a criminal record, which would then make it harder for them to find housing or any other non-sex work related employment. Activists have been pushing for decriminalization worldwide. There are some successes around the world. New Zealand removed criminal penalties for sex work in 2003, and Amnesty International called for other countries to do that in 2016. A study from 2008 found that after decriminalization, sex workers felt more comfortable to report any form of abuse to the police and are more able to insist on safer sex practices and also refuse any clients that they might not want to see. Sweden and Norway have interestingly and also progressively, may I add so, adopted what is known as a Nordic model. And this model eliminates criminal penalties for selling sex, but retains penalties for buyers, because finally let's maybe see where the cause of the issue is. If there is a demand and if people are requesting for sex workers to come, maybe they are at fault if something was to happen. And they're usually the clients who can be abusive, and it needs to be regulated better in such a way for somebody to finally understand that the fault isn't at people who are providing services. But in the US, where buying and selling sex is illegal everywhere except from the few counties of Nevada, decriminalization is still a tougher pill for some to swallow. And this is still the case today, but it's been the world that Heidi Fleiss has stepped into since the 90s. To try to understand how and why, we need to start off from the beginning. Heidi was born as Heidi Lynn Fleiss on December the 30th, 1965. She is the third oldest out of the 6 siblings in her family. She grew up in LA with her dad, Paul Fleiss, being a respected pediatrician in the area, and her mom was a primary school teacher. As mentioned, Heidi was the third eldest, but she was the first biological child. So what happened is that her parents each had a sibling that died before Heidi was born. One died of throat cancer, one died of a drug overdose, and each of them left a child. So basically they adopted their sibling's kid, and then together they first had Heidi. Heidi would always say that her parents, but especially her dad, gave her the best childhood possible, and that she managed to take all of the opportunities ahead of her.
I'm one of 6 kids. My father's a practicing pediatrician, kind of an intellectual hippie without the Jerry Garcia and Charles Manson aspect of it. And my mother, she was a school teacher, and I had a great family growing up. I couldn't have had a better childhood. The values that my parents instilled, sounds funny coming from me, my core values and my whatever that they instilled on me and the lessons they taught me that molded me to be, although I could be so hardcore, I'm a very sensitive and very emotional person.
We see her in this entertainment documentary as a tomboy, making these movies in the 90s as she was growing up. One was called The Babysitter. Basically, it's just like the crude editing of them pushing the baby carriage down the street. So in the first shot, like, you see a baby in it, and then, you know, once the baby carriage is just sliding down the road, and you will kind of have to leave it to the imagination that that baby is just being pushed away by the cruel babysitter. She was the Kevin McAllister of the freaking 1960s. She was like the first original Home Alone. Kevin McAllister is a psychopath. That statement in itself will make you lose followers, but Heidi Fleiss was not. She just started skipping school as she was growing up. She said she was a terrible student and that she took her GED when she was 16. She lied to her parents how she was going to school, but rather she was just goofing around. She loved hanging out on the beach and the Santa Anita racetrack. This was her first passion, gambling.
I was city chess champion 2 years in a row at the age of 13 or 14 for the city of Los Angeles, but I had a terrible learning disability in math class, and one day someone brought me to the racetrack, and I made a bet on a long shot. Like a $20 bet on a horse that came in and paid $68, like a $30 horse, $34 horse. And so all of a sudden I make almost $1,000 in 5 minutes at a racetrack. So
she was hooked. Like so many people get hooked onto gambling is when they make their first win so easily. And that is going to become a pattern in Heidi Fleiss's life. That easy sense of gratification and the lack of consequences for them. For example, then later she goes on to say how her parents promised to buy her a car if she gets all the good grades that year. So she did. She was smart. She got all of the good grades. She got a car. And from that point on, she was like, why did I work so hard for that? I'm going to fake all of my report cards from now on in order to get something as easily from them. Eventually, at the age of 16, faking the report cards just wasn't enough. She just didn't have the grades to continue her school, so she dropped out. And instead, she started being addicted to a different kind of vice. She started partying. However, at the age of 17 and 18, a couple of things happened that kind of shook her to the core and, in my opinion, have affected her for the future. So when she was 17, she dropped out of school, her parents didn't even know. She was going clubbing and she was partying it up with her younger sister. And as they were driving and about to go into a parking lot, the car just swerved and then it suddenly flipped over and her sister's Shayna's arm got stuck under the car. She had to have 6 operations for them to salvage her arm, and Heidi felt responsible for it. Then in 1984, when she was 18 years old, her parents got divorced and she started living with her dad and the youngest brother in Santa Monica. Something that I would like you to bear in mind, and let me know if you are actually like a licensed psychologist, psychiatrist, and actually know more about this as we go through this story, what stood out to me is the lack of certain things that we know about her childhood. We only know the stories that Heidi tells, the random babysitter story, and then that she was a chess champion, that she got hooked onto gambling, and I'm not saying that she is lying. I'm just saying that there is a lot that we probably don't know that is left out, in particular about her relationship with her mom and just each and every parent. And I am saying that because of the two prevalent themes from this point on. One was her relationships and affinity, let's call it that, to older men. And the other one was that same thing, but when it comes to older women. Just the one with older men would always end up being sexual, and the one with older women would end up being just weird on certain levels. So to start it off, when she was still in her late teenage years, so 18, 19, she would be going to this club called Helena's. And she always wanted to have a better lifestyle. She wanted to portray herself as being seen by the influential people, by the celebrities. And here she met one such man. The only catch is Heidi was 19 and this man was 57 when they met. One night in this club in Helena's, a friend of Heidi's tells her, hey, we are moving on to the after party to this man's estate. It's this wealthy financier, like in his 50s, you know, do you want to come? It's gonna be like other young people, it's just this guy's rich and we're just moving there. And Heidi goes and immediately here she's stunned. She sees what she likes, she sees that this is a wealthy house, she sees a potential new lifestyle for herself, and she asks this friend, who owns this place? Introduce me to this guy. And that guy ended up being Bernie Cornfield. Heidi would later in the interview say, I don't like the men under 45. Just show me a 60-year-old guy with $1 million. Point me in that direction. Bernie was from Turkey. He moved to the US when he was 4 years old, and his dad died shortly after. And this is with the insurance money of his dad, where he figured he has a natural gift for selling. So they used some of that insurance money to buy one of those age and weight guessing stands at a fun fair near Coney Island. After graduating, he started working as a social worker, but has since started selling the funds for an investment house. About 30 years before he was to meet Heidi, which means that she wasn't even in the plans of being born, that is what I find so creepy about the whole situation, he moved from New York to Paris, and he founded a company that was called Investors Overseas Services. This is one of those fund sales companies, but he moved in order to avoid both American and European tax regulations. Of course, this is finally going to catch up with him. The company would collapse in 1970, Cornfield would end up being arrested in Switzerland in 1973 and sentenced to 11 months, but he was ultimately acquitted. But he managed to keep most of his earnings, and with that money he settled in Beverly Hills in California, buying himself a house and getting himself involved in film industry circles. To her parents, Heidi would say that she was working under Bernie, that she was his secretary, and the two of them for the next 4 years would be traveling all over the world. Heidi would explain this relationship saying, Bernie was my first real relationship. I didn't lose my virginity until I was almost 18. I'm real slow. I'd go to bed at night and say, why can't I have tits like Dolly Parton? But I remember the first guy. He was blonde. I've never slept with a blonde again, and I wanted to understand what everyone was talking about. So I just did it. And it was like, this is so painful, I will die. I will never do this again. I'll be a nun. No way I will do this again. And now, what am I supposed to be? The biggest fucker on earth. The main reason behind this relationship not lasting beyond 4 years was that Bernie couldn't be monogamous. Even according to Heidi, he had to have other women, and she eventually didn't like that. Whether she didn't like sharing him, or whether she didn't like sharing his money, or both, she decided to break up. She moved in with one of her friends that she met through those parties at Helena's and other clubs, but she really wanted to retain her place in the society. The friend that she moved in with, her mom was a real estate agent, so Heidi thought, like, let me study, get the license, but she gave up on it, because at this point, Heidi was partying it up hard. For the last few years, she had all of the money in the world to spend out clubbing and mostly getting hooked on different drugs. So one such night, again in the Helena's club, she would end up meeting her next boyfriend. This man would be Ivan Nagy, who was born in Hungary, who was a photographer and TV director. Everybody in the documentary that I have watched, the early one from 1998, describes Nagy as a B-level producer, that he had movies and series, but that he wasn't really on the top. Everybody said that the relationship with Ivan was toxic from the get-go, that they had that chemistry, but that they also suspected this is not going to end well. Heidi herself said about their first time that he forced her, but that she liked it. Ivan would always negate any accuses of violence, of domestic abuse, of him being forceful with Heidi.
Times when we broke up and there was a lot of emotion involved, she would call 911 and fabricate stories. And then when I abused her, I pushed her out the door, I did, all the things that you're supposed to do, except there was never any evidence.
Nevertheless, in November of 1989, Heidi applied for a restraining order against Nagy, detailing instances of alleged physical abuse, but Heidi let the charges drop.
The friends, however, would continue to meet up with Heidi after one such night, where she would go to a club, then go to Ivan's house, then call one of the friends saying, we were fighting, I don't want to sleep here, can I sleep at yours? But then, due to the domestic hostility, because now she was living with Nagy, due to the addiction to drugs, she suddenly started pushing those friends away. And this is when, according to one account of events, Ivan Nagy might have sold Heidi Fleiss to another prominent madam. The story goes that in 1989, Nagy had a $450 gambling debt. He denied that this has ever happened. He denied that he didn't want Heidi to work, and the last thing he wanted was to sell her to a madam. However, Heidi said that this was quite literally his job, that he would sell other women to this madam. In this interview, Heidi would say that this madam, Madam Alex, had him collect money, scare the girls, do errands, and for that she would end up getting him laid and even pay him, so that he quite literally worked under Madam Alex. According to the version presented in that interview, Nagy sold Heidi and she had to go and have sex while on drugs with this Arab man at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel for about $5,000. This man had paid her up in traveler's checks and even gave her $2,000 to give as a commission to Ivan. And she said she wasn't scared because she was so out of her mind on drugs. Depending on who you talk to, this is the version of events that is in some interviews, or there is a version that Heidi was introduced to Madam Alex through a friend, and that she was just too proud to ever admit as to how she actually got into the business with her. Because again, she was quite vulnerable at this point as an addict and somebody going through potentially some form of domestic hostility. Madam Alex herself had quite an interesting life. She was born in Manila to a Spanish-Filipina mom and a German dad, and when she was 17, her parents brought her to the US, to San Francisco. One day she just took a bus ride and she got off in Oakland, where she saw a help wanted sign on a parish house, so she went in. And here she got about $200 a month when she took this job taking care of 4 priests. Another priest came to that house and Alex didn't like him, so she decided it's enough, I've been doing this job for a while, and she moved to LA, where she got a random job, and still, as a teenager, she marries a scientist. She had 2 kids with this man, but she left them behind, divorced him after a few years, and got married to another man. This man was an alcoholic, and Alex suspected with years that he might have been a contract killer himself, but he was hanging out in a different world. He was also a player, he was cheating on Alex, but he was cheating on her, and all of his friends were high-class people. Alex would say that everybody was so elegant that she herself started spending time in beauty salons. They were fancy, smart, and they knew incredible people, like the millionaire who sat in his suit all day just writing $5,000 checks to girls. This wasn't her world though. Alex was a florist at the time, and she really never thought that she would have an opportunity to use that knowledge that she had from going to salons with these posh women. But one day, in 1971, a customer came and she just ordered some yellow roses, and Alex didn't have like a great batch of them. So this woman kind of started chatting with her about like how, she's not gonna buy roses, but basically they just started chatting about random things, and this woman told her that she is a madam from England and she wanted to sell her book of clients. So Alex ended up buying it for $5,000. When she shared that story with her husband, how she has this black book of clients that a madam has sold to her, he was like, oh, that's cute. And then he died 3 months after that. She's so cold about everything. There is an interview with Alex, she's just brutal. And she said when she started actually calling those clients now, with the opportunity, of course, that she has a place to operate this business from, and also potentially has the clients because she knows people in the society now because of this husband of hers, well, she realized that half of the men in that book of clients were also dead. But that didn't stop her. She finally tapped into those areas and opened up her own brothel. Just like Heidi will in the future, Alex knew what her angle was here. She knew the advantage that she had in order to hire the best girls, because she has felt it on her own skin. She has felt it how, when she was just a florist, liaising with people from high society, with other women, how she was looked upon, how she had to go to beauty salons, how she had to dress up differently in order to be respected. So as soon as she started hiring those girls, she also started investing in them. She would pay for them to be waxed, for their breast augmentation, from hair tinting, wardrobe, and also make sure that on top of that they still get paid. And here is where everything we spoke about in the history section of this video also comes into play. Because from a financial point of view, Alex knew that she would have to test these women regularly. Because within a few years, every American man with a wide-ranging sex life would have to consider the possibility of bringing STD home to his wife. She knew that the paranoia surrounding this would put a dent in the sex industry, and as such would put a dent in her own business and her own brothels. So she made sure to make the point of her girls looking the best, her investing in them, and also that they were STD free, that they didn't have any diseases, that it was completely safe to go and engage with them. Once Madam Alex would have the basics sorted, she also knew that she had a skill. She knew that it was the man's world. But she also knew when a woman engages in procuring sex, it's fun. There's a giggle in it. When a man is involved, he's sleazy, he's a pimp. He may know how to keep girls in line and he may make money, but he doesn't know what she does. And that is that she had a skill in matchmaking. She would tell the guys, you're getting a nice girl, she's young, pleasant, she can do things, she can certainly make love. She's not a rocket scientist, but she is everything else. She knew that these men who are looking for her women are usually also businessmen. They're impatient. At the end of their hard, long days, they just want a woman. This is when Alex would come in with all of these well-groomed women that were ready to provide only the basic services. For everything else, the men had to pay more. And as such, then Alex would get a bigger cut that would help her then invest to keep this business going. However, she also popped up on the radar of the police. She was arrested 4 times between 72 and 83 for the conviction of pandering and then sex work in 1982. But despite of these convictions, Alex's business continued. And this is, as we are gonna learn, because of some form of preferential treatment that she had due to her liaising with these police officers. You see, as Alex was growing older, she started working more and more just from bed. She had a good business going, it was a well-oiled operation, she would just have the girls come in, bring the money, she had her black book of clients. She didn't have to put much effort into it. So now with the police on her case, she made a deal with them. If a client was a drug dealer, if they were to call her up and say that they want a girl, but they also want some coke, or God forbid that they want a girl that is underage, well, then Alex would say like, yeah, of course, come at this and that time, and then she's gonna ring up the police for them to come and arrest them. And it is in this moment in Alex's and Heidi's career that the two of them met. So Alex was a prominent madam who already had a business working from bed, he already had everything set up. So why would she, regardless of how she would meet one such Heidi Fleiss, take somebody like that upon? Multiple reasons, because Heidi had her own skills, and the first gap in the market, the first change that she saw worth making was that Alex's girls were kind of getting older. Yes, they were very well kept, like she did make sure that they're groomed, but she knew that there is a market for younger girls, legal, but younger. Heidi's first task started being recruiting younger girls in order to replace the older ones. And another advantage that Heidi had over Alex was that she wasn't bedbound. She was known. She was known in Helena, she was known in other clubs. So now there was a whole other perspective of her going out clubbing. She would use every single party that she would have in the future in order to hire these girls. During those parties, these girls would hear from Heidi about the lavish lifestyle, about how you just do the basic sex. If they want more, they have to pay up. And yes, there is commission that we take, roughly to explain that, for about like $1,500 that you would earn basically just for the basic making out, making love with a man. For the evening, Heidi, would usually get $900, so she would get a good chunk of that money. But she would suck those girls in by telling them about how well groomed they're gonna get, how they're gonna get paid to be waxed, they don't have to worry about anything from the eyebrow plucking to the clothes that they're gonna wear. And eventually, if they know how to do their business well, they might get paid to go travel, to accompany these men, to have that whole girlfriend experience. So you can see how she would mold these women and then bring them on to Alex, and in such a way start her own business just under her madam. In this documentary, you see the reenactments. We just learn how close that relationship between Alex and Heidi became. Like, as I mentioned, Alex was bedbound, so Heidi would just walk into her room, talk to her about her black book, about the clients, learn the ins and outs of her business, get a bit about Alex's background and how she became the madam that she is. And from a psychological point of view here, because I said that it's very interesting to see her relationships with older men versus with older women, which we have here with Madam Alex, the psychologist at trial said that this is due to the coercive relationships, that because Heidi was drawn to drugs and sex work, she might have suffered from a personality disorder that led her to get in such kind of relationships. Meaning you're easier to influence, you're easier to groom in a way. Here, unlike with the men, there was also the aspect that she is actually getting her own money. She is actually responsible for her own financial safety. And there was probably something really appealing in that. She finally found her own talent. Heidi spoke that she used to do this as a babysitter as a kid. Not the whole movie where the baby carriage is flying down the road, but rather that she was an actual babysitter, and she kind of created her own network of friends, where she would do sort of a referral scheme. She would refer other friends that were in school when she was still attending one. She would refer them to these families and then kind of get a commission from them upon those referrals. And now she just translated that to a completely different business. In the early 90s, as Heidi is still with Nagy, she called 911 multiple times on him. She even got a restraining order, but she dropped it. So while that toxic relationship is still ongoing, Alex gets arrested for pandering. This is when Heidi finally sees the opportunity to implement everything she has learned working under Madame Alex and make her own move. You see, Madame Alex was keeping her black book in a Kleenex box. Yeah, super safe. So Heidi, of course, just went into that room, took that book and started poaching Madame Alex's clients. Clients weren't the problem. Heidi knew how to talk the talk at this point. She said she changed the rules. She would tell the guys, you get what you pay for. You can find girls for less, but they're not the best. Mine are the best. I saw it as a way that girls could really take advantage of men. And we did exactly that. Every man was taken advantage of. I tell the girls, don't ever sell out. Leave if you want, you are the boss, you are in charge. The small issue that Heidi had at first was to get women, young women, because she used to do that but under Alex. Now she had to run her own ring on her own at the age of 25. So she deployed the photographer strategy. She would get these young men to pretend to be photographers, speak with a woman, approach her, tell her how pretty she is, if, you know, he can take her pictures, and then kind of be like, hey, I actually work for this woman, you know, it's easy money, here's a business card, give her a call. Because she was out and about herself, sometimes she would be the one approaching these women in a restaurant as she was eating. She would read the room and just approach the woman and hand out the card herself. So within a year, she had over 100 girls working for her. Heidi ran a different kind of business from Madame Alex, with the emphasis on pandering. She knew the power of referrals. She knew that people attending the clubs that she does as well all have the same dentist, the same florist, the same butcher that they go to, so why wouldn't they have the same madam? When one person knows somebody, everybody else wants to get on it. And the power is always where the majority is. So once she would get the clients from her black book, and then she would get the girls, she would submit them to makeovers, kind of just like she learned under Madame Alex. Clients had to be referred. For her to have the new clients, for her not to completely own the business, the new clients had to be referred. Once that's done, girls would have pagers. So they would get paged and then they would just ring her, ask her who the client is, for her to tell her sort of like what to expect, and then they would go to meet up with a guy. And they would be driven there by a driver that Heidi provided. To ensure safety, this driver was to wait for the girl to finish, and then she was to be transported either to Heidi or to her own home. Her standard fee for the night was $1,500, of which she kept $900, but that was the low end. Often men would pay thousands more, especially if the girl had to travel long distance. If the guys had a specific type of fetish, the girls would fulfill the request. And all of them liked Heidi because she was just so open when it comes to communication. She wasn't bullshitting them. What they knew they're gonna get and face, that's exactly what they got. And they knew they were safe. So all of these girls and Heidi would engage in different parties in what was then a hotspot in that area, this club called On the Rocks, that was attended by celebrities. And if not there, well then Heidi would have parties at her own house. Because she knew from the get-go that this is illegal, that her sex work business isn't really a legal way to get the money. So she knew that the money that she had gotten, she couldn't just go into the bank and just deposit like these large sums of it. Instead, she bought a huge house for over 1.5 million, if I remember right. And these kind of became scouting parties for new clients and for new girls. So within a few years, Heidi has achieved something that Madame Alex has been working her whole life on. She was doing it well, everything was oiled up. So where did she fuck up? Rather, where did she fuck up first? There was an article that was published stating that Madame Alex's jewels have been robbed from her house. At this point, Madame Alex was in prison, and somebody apparently robbed the jewelry from her own house. It wasn't Heidi. Later, the real perps were apprehended. However, the journalist got a word of the story, and this journalist called Sean Hubler from the LA Times wanted to interview Heidi. And Heidi accepted. She was like, I have nothing to hide. However, during this interview that was later published in the form of an article, she has openly spoken about her girls. Literally, this journalist said, we went to interview her in the house and the girls were just like roaming in this huge ass mansion that you're like, how do you have this money to buy this house? And why are there like 10 girls surrounding you in it? They had to prove it though. There were a couple of girls that decided to testify against her. There was Nagi, who was kind of resentful because of apparently false claims of domestic violence. And then there was Madame Alex from prison, who really wanted a deal, who really wanted to be out and regain her own business. So this is when a police force was tasked to basically track every move Heidi Fleiss would make. They put this detective on a case who immediately saw a blind spot. They saw that friend, the friend that Heidi moved in with after her arguments with Nagi, the friend that was always there, the friend who was giving interviews, the friend that was always with Heidi in the clubs, Jennifer. And he looked a bit into the background of Jennifer, realized her mom is in real estate. So he goes to On the Rocks, I believe it was, and just sort of innocently starts up a conversation with Jennifer about how he is this rich businessman looking to buy a house. And Jennifer, of course, not knowing that he is an actual police officer, starts corresponding, saying, my mom works in real estate, you know, I can link the two of you up. And Heidi is just passing by, and Jennifer is like, oh my god, hey Heidi, rich businessman, you know, kind of insinuating like potential client, get the gist. Heidi gets involved into the conversation, and soon enough this man starts mentioning how he might be looking for the girls to hire, you know, once he gets this new house. But even before that, him and his friends are kind of planning a birthday party, and they're planning it at the Beverly Hotel. Would you happen to know of a couple of girls that would do something like that? And Heidi takes the bait. Heidi asks Emily, that detective, for his type of girl, and then she sent some of her girls to that hotel. All of the men that were inside of that room were police officers. They sort of put the cash on the table, they were wired so that everything is recorded, and as soon as those women started undressing, they arrested them. And then 20 minutes later, the police car was just waiting by Heidi's house. As she was taking the garbage out, they also arrested her. At Heidi's house, the police seized 13 grams of coke, some traveler's check that were signed by Charlie Sheen, as well as Heidi's black book. This book was not actually black, it was just a couple of red Gucci notebooks. Heidi was charged and she was released on $100,000 bail that she had to get from the bail bondsman. Heidi was charged here on 5 counts on pandering and 1 count of drug possession because of the coke that was found in her house. And now there are 2 cases against her. So this is one, but the second one was that they found out about some taxes, that she wasn't actually paying taxes on the business that she was conducting. So the first trial would be criminal and then the second one would be federal. She was released awaiting trial, and this arrest didn't really make it to the news. It was just like a small article in one newspapers, and all of these journalists, like the LA Times journalist, everybody following this story was like, what the fuck? Like, there is a story here. So they kind of went through the police reports as to what was found on her location. They were like, what is this black book thing? The red Gucci notebooks that was called a black book? Don't they have clients' names? There is a story there. There's an angle there. Would Heidi, maybe for a plea deal, reveal the names of the clients, or would those people, who are most certainly famous, actually come to testify against her? We need those names. Heidi didn't really help herself that much here. At some point she was just entertaining it. She was saying, oh, I'm gonna sell this black book, I'm gonna sell all of the names for $1 million. You kind of already know about Charlie Sheen because of that traveler's check in my bag, so he had to eventually get the immunity. But then there was a leaked kind of gossip about the Columbia film production money and how they used to hire sex workers basically on the film shoots. Nothing was found, like there was a whole financial audit here, but this was also brought up in court. It didn't do her any favors, because now all of the speculations were, will the client's names be released or not? And when she was arraigned in 1993, Heidi chose to plead not guilty, and this plea meant a trial was to take place, and that meant names might be revealed. The prosecution here would end up offering immunity to the guys that had the least to lose in order for them to testify against Heidi. And the one prominent name that everybody by this point knew of was Charlie Sheen, who testified that he hired Fleiss's call girls at least 27 times and paid at least $50,000. Heidi would never name names. She would always be loyal and would never reveal her clients' names, so we don't even know about any others that were in court testifying against her. Her charges in this criminal trial would eventually be thrown on appeal. I believe it was something to do with the jury. Nobody really goes into details on here. Maybe they have kind of looked into the news and the newspapers into like who the actual clients were, into the gossip, so they were biased. However, the federal trial remained. And here, what came to light was that Heidi claimed to be making $33,000 a year. But she lived in $1 million house, so that didn't check out. And the IRS eventually came after her, and not just after her, but her dad as well, because her dad helped her secure a loan for her house. In August of 1995, 2 months after Madam Alex, her mentor, passes away, Heidi Fleiss is convicted of tax fraud, and she gets sentenced to 37 months. Her dad got about 3 years probation and community service. So in January of 1997, Heidi starts serving that sentence. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. She will end up serving about 2 years out of almost 3. inside of the prison cell. And do you think, because I have read so many articles on this about how, well, is she serving somebody else's time? Because what about the clients? What about even the sex workers, if you think about it, that have cut the deal, that have gotten the immunity in order to testify against her? There's a lot of people here that could have been behind those prison walls, and Heidi was the only one that got there, and she was the most loyal out of all of them. She never revealed anybody's names to this day. So let me know what you think about that, because that's kind of like one of the debates surrounding this story online. But after 2 years, she gets out of jail, and in 1999 she declares herself bankrupt. However, after that, she starts her own clothing company. She calls it Heidi Wear, and there were a lot of people that even just wanted like her signature on them. Like you see this in the documentary, as the clothing is made, she kind of signs it or makes like a nice card to send along. She also wrote her own book called Pandering, and in the first batch she sold 50,000 copies of the book for $50 each. Upon getting out of prison, she also starts dating yet another sleazebag. I have sighed so many times when it comes to Heidi's men and like the choice in these people, but this guy actually has offenses and charges against him, and some of them are actually critical. So Tom Sizemore is gonna be her next boyfriend. And this guy had a couple of charges, some of them from the time that he was dating Heidi. He is the American actor and producer, and in 2003 he allegedly sexually molested an 11-year-old actress during a film production. And he denied the wrongdoing, was allowed to go back on the film set because different fucking times. And this case never went forward until 2018, when this actress filed a lawsuit against him, claiming that that alleged abuse caused some emotional problems throughout her life, and seeking at least $3 million. This lawsuit was dismissed, and he never got charged with this assault, and this never got looked into. But in that same year, 2003, Heidi was back in court, and she was back in court as a victim because she claimed that Tom Sizemore battered and harassed her. There were 7 counts of battering and harassing submitted by Heidi. Sizemore only got 7 months in jail and 4 months in a drug treatment facility for this. And Heidi would get a restraining order against him, but the two of them would be seen in 2010 in this reality show that is called Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew. So the two of them appear to talk about their drug relapses and how they cope with that. I didn't watch it. I saw what it looks like because he had like other famous people on it, and I just hate shows like that. Like what's the one where it's like You Are the Father? God, those shows make me die inside. I'm like, how do we publicize this that way? Even Dr. Phil, I just can't watch those kind of shows. I don't know if you can. If you can, do watch it and then let me know in the comments what you gained out of that experience, because I just leave those to others. I just spend a lot of time watching other true crime shit. Once she was out of this relationship, we come to the part where I was really vouching for Heidi. So in 2004, she had this store, another clothing store that was called Hollywood Madam. And there, somebody who was working with her suggests, well, you know, what you used to do, sex work, it's legal in certain counties in Nevada. Like, maybe check, you know, if there is a ranch or if there is a location that you can buy. Those are kind of like not really densely populated areas, there's nothing nearby. You know, somebody just put an idea into her head. But Heidi at that point had an idea of her own. The way she envisioned this while she was probably lying within a prison cell was as a stud farm. So what she had been seeing throughout her whole life in terms of sex work, in terms of how brothels work, was that men would be the clients and they would be going into those brothels to meet up with girls. So she wanted to flip that around and for the women to become the customer base. for women to actually be paying for the services to go to a brothel, and the only sex workers in this brothel would be men. Heidi looks into it, she checks out the properties, and she finds 60 acres that she can buy and then build this stud farm. She says in this documentary that this is the closest to Hollywood where sex work was legal. As we have gone through history, this is particularly why we have done so, in order for us to do the research, because this is why it all went wrong. This is the main core of my issue, because it's not the nearest place to Hollywood. It is the only place in the United States, those couple of counties in Nevada, where sex work is legal. To add to that lack of research, it was only in 2009 that male sex workers were legalized in the brothels in Nevada. So to begin with, she's doing this in 2004 and 2005, that she had this plan and that she bought this whole ranch and decided to move there, without just even knowing the real basics of it. Until that point, men were barred in Nevada from the sex work because codes specified that sex workers must undergo cervical testing for STDs, and that would in turn rule out men. Another problem that Heidi didn't account for and didn't research and look into was the climate. You can see her literally driving in the middle of this desert, because that's where these ranches are. There's nothing nearby. Even when you look at it in the map, like in Google Maps, you see an ATM and like a shop that is miles away from anywhere. And that is the climate of the place. Charles Manson was captured half an hour from Pahrump, from the place where she has just moved into. So if you are thinking about women driving a couple of hours to simply just engage in sex work and go to one such brothel, is it really safe for them? But Heidi had a plan, and she describes it in this documentary, and her whole concept for how this is supposed to look like, you know, architecturally pleasing, right? That she compared what this brothel, this stud farm, was supposed to be to a monastery, a setup within a monastery. You know, you would have like the main congregation, the main part, and then all of these different rooms, like the confessionals. Just here, people would be getting laid. Wildest things come out of this woman's mouth. The wildest shit.
And then, okay, this might sound crazy, but when I'm thinking of the brothel, the layout of a monastery, if you think about it, how that's like they all congregate together and then go separate off and pray and stuff. It's like perfect layout for a brothel. There's like a social area and then you go off. So I studied great monasteries. I'm sure the religious people will just love that one.
As she's planning this whole architectural masterpiece where the design would have solar panels, where the women would feel proud, you know, to be attending one such location, it would be all kind of high class. It wouldn't just be, you know, in the middle of nowhere where they would feel unsafe and where they wouldn't really like going. Well, she also meets a neighbor. It's literally like the only neighbor is this woman who is again bedridden, and Heidi is taking care of her, making sure that she is fed. And this woman has a whole house filled up with birds, macaws, parrots. So Heidi kind of starts taking care of these birds and getting really attached to them. Her main focus, though, still needs to be on the actual application, because the brothel license application needs to be approved by the board of the county commissioners. But Heidi had a criminal record, so that will of course bring the bias to this whole thing, because she was already found guilty of pandering before, so now they have to deem that she will not pose threat to the county in the future. And Heidi in this documentary says herself, well, I'm gonna make sure that the application is filled out, that there is nothing they can say against it, unless they want to say you are not getting approved because you're Heidi Fleiss. According to the law, she can still get the application approved even as a felon, but it is at the discretion of the county commissioners and the sheriff. then she has to change that whole law that I didn't see in this documentary that she was aware of, the wording that requires sex workers to have weekly cervical examinations will have to be altered for the men. Once that's done, she may be open to charges of discrimination if she also doesn't offer homosexual services. This whole documentary from 2008 focuses on the whole slew of characters that are working against her, that just don't see this happening. There is Miss Cathy, who owns literally the only bar in town and has been there for years, and she kind of argues with Heidi constantly that there is no way that women will drive out there, and she doesn't understand how Heidi even purchased this place for $60,000 when it's worth millions. She kind of thinks it was under the table, that she has different connections there. Miss Cathy started her own petition in order to get this dismantled. There's a whole chat here about how do you know that you can work with a bunch of men. It is the man's world, you know, everybody in brothels administration is a male, and why would the tables flip suddenly? Why would women be a customer base that would want to actually go out and hire men? There's a whole sexist concept about like a woman can't run a brothel herself and the customer base cannot be women at all, because throughout the history that's not how it worked, so the rules can't be changed now. And partially she is right, even though I hate it. I fucking hate it because I vouched for Heidi so hard here. Because there's a guy, George Flint, who is interviewed for the documentary, who is the director of the Nevada Brothel Owners Association, who keeps saying that Heidi doesn't bring anything to the table. Rather, she only brings further risks, because will she be able to regulate everything this time? Will she have the finances? Will she have the customers? Will there be even any profit out of this? Because this is a different area where she doesn't have any clients, any customers, and rather she's a felon, so they will have to monitor this strictly. And again, everybody is working against her. Nobody really wants this to happen in that area. And George Flint poses another issue that isn't really discussed here, but that I find kind of important in this whole story, and Heidi mentions it herself. It is Heidi Fleiss that everything is based off here. And that might be the problem. The problem might be that she is the focus, that she always wanted to be the Miss Visibility. And there are other brothels in the area run by men, yes, but also there's not that much hype, there's not that much drama around them. Like, you don't want that attached to a business. You don't want somebody with previous charges, you don't want somebody on your tail, even in the few counties where you're trying to have this regulated. Because sooner or later, then somebody who is above you might decide, well, why would we have this legal? Because you have just proved that this A doesn't work, but also that you have put somebody in charge at your own discretion who isn't capable of running a legal business. As if everything wasn't already working against Heidi in this case, there was a guy, another brothel owner in the area, that wanted to partner with her. This guy called Joey Richards. However, what Heidi might or might not have known was that Joey was under the investigation by the FBI. So eventually, just as she moved there with these big dreams, Joey gets arrested after bribing a bunch of officials. In turn, the FBI, now with the knowledge of Heidi Fleiss being in communications with him, subpoenas her phone records, and she becomes a witness in his case. In 2009, Joey Richards was sentenced. He was to spend a year in a Las Vegas halfway house and 5 years on probation for trying to bribe these officials. This left Heidi in quite a predicament, because even if she was to possibly have that application approved, now that she was associated with another felon, of course nobody's going to look at it twice. Also, that neighbor, the lady that had all of the parrots and macaws, has passed away, so Heidi had to take over all of those birds. We see her building a whole aviary in her house in order to have them all there, and we kind of see her losing it a bit, in my opinion, because she gets so attached. She has like the favorite birds, she's super attached, she's acting like a mom of sorts when it comes to these birds, and you kind of have to see the connection between everything that Heidi has done in her life. That she has always acted as some sort of protector, some sort of madam. There was always that fascination of just taking care of somebody, whether or not it was to bring her profit. To make money, she started her own laundrette, calling it Dirty Laundry, and that was based near her home in Crystal. That was until something happened in 2010. Joey Richards sold his brothel to a guy named Dennis Hoff. And Dennis supposedly started dating Heidi Fleiss and made her his consultant. This was a bunny ranch that they were running, so not exactly what Heidi signed up for. She still didn't turn the table, she didn't still have what she intended to, but I suppose at least it was something that she had the skills for. But then in 2018, Dennis Hoff died. And there's a whole speculation here as to who his bunny ranch was supposed to go to. He had other consultants, in particular this woman called Suzette. And Suzette was put on the brothel licenses for his 4 locations. From what I've read, Suzette is still the person that is in charge of them. There was kind of like a speculation whether or not she was on those licenses, but she's still running the bunny ranch. And Heidi isn't. She's living in her house with her parrots. She's on and off drugs based off of the latest interviews that she has given. There's one on Oprah that she has given later when Dennis Hoff was still alive, like in 2013, where she speaks how, you know, relapses work and how she tries to be off of them, but then isn't always so successful at doing so.
Remember the day after I was arrested, I'll never forget that day. I was sitting out by my pool looking over Beverly Hills and the entire city, and I felt this big, and I thought, how did I, excuse my language, the best job on earth? And I don't know if drugs clouded my judgment at the time or what, but I really, really felt stupid, and I was so mad that I messed up. I was so mad at myself because I knew better. I knew better. I didn't really know that I understood that I had a drug problem until I did Dr. Drew's show called Celebrity Rehab, and at the time when I was asked to do it, I thought, no way, who's going to get sober on TV? And then I thought, what the hell, just who cares if I don't have a drug problem, I just get the money, hey, just do it for the money. But then when I saw the show and I saw what I looked like, I was just horrified, and I realized I do have a drug problem, and not only a drug problem but a very serious drug problem. I'm sober today, and look at, I have weak moments, very weak moments, and since Dr. Drew's show I haven't been sober the whole time, and I've relapsed quite a few times, but there's been times since that show when I've thought, I need to go back on there again.
By the end of the documentary from 2008, Joey Richards' trial was still ongoing, so she still had the plans to return to the stud farm projects once that's done. For now, I'm not sure if she plans to return to that project. That would be interesting to follow, and I still vouch for her. I still want somebody to do this, and Heidi at least has some skills, you know, has it on her CV. She is problematic in a couple of ways. You can kind of see why she might not get that license, but also you can see why she would be good at it. She was quite decent at her job. But for now, for profit, she got paid to appear at that Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew. Apparently, I read she got $500,000, so that's why I kind of don't like these shows. Like, you're a show about addictions and then you're paying somebody $500,000. What are the chances that they're gonna spend it on, like, coke? Her dad also died in 2014, and she got about 1 million inheritance from him. She then invested that into Bitcoin, and she intended to use the money that she was to get from Bitcoin into her birds. Now here is where she got back in touch with this woman called Elizabeth Keating, that was apparently a reporter and had known Heidi for 16 years, and she asked her, because she was apparently knowledgeable about Bitcoin, to handle Heidi's cryptocurrency trades. And this Elizabeth woman apparently stole $4 million from Heidi, so in 2019 Heidi sued her. Heidi told the Hollywood Reporter that she sank everything she had into Bitcoin, but then when she asked Elizabeth where the money was in November 2017, Keating ducked her calls and locked her out of the accounts. To steal from these birds who really need help, it's despicable. Heidi was hoping to raise money for the bird sanctuary that she runs, but now she's still tangled in this lawsuit. I checked yesterday, I couldn't find that it was resolved, so I assume either one of them dropped it, or this is still ongoing, or just nobody really cares about this topic as much as I do. That in a nutshell is the story of Heidi Fleiss, everything that I could find to date. But now, what I was thinking of discussing and what I would like to know in the comments is, with another ranch technically being female-owned by Suzette, if that is true, if she has inherited Dennis Hoff's ranch, is there still hope for Heidi in particular, and then for other female-owned ranches that would have females as their customer base? And I think in the end, you will either see this as, is the world really ready for this kind of change, or is it simply that this is Heidi Fleiss's world and that nobody really wants her in charge? If you are in the first group, you probably see this as, why would women be paying for sex? Why would they be paying for something when, you know, a woman can go into a bar and immediately get somebody to buy her a drink? Like, why would they be the ones paying for it? And if you are in that group, you also see the other aspect of it, and that is that this whole stud farm, the way that she imagined it, you know, how the architecture is gonna look like, can still be seen as a publicity stunt, rather than her actually having arguments about why this is so great, why she has moved to Nevada, that she has done all of this research. You just don't really see that. And when thinking about that, when thinking about whether or not something like this would still have been done for publicity, or maybe whether or not that is why she dropped it, because back then, you know, she was still associated to one of the biggest scandals called Charlie Sheen situation. Possibly will she not expose all of those clients, and then with time the relevancy kind of stopped. Well, you have to consider what would have motivated her to do it in the first place. What was really her drive? Was it the money? Was it the fact that she realized her own potential, her own talent, and just wanted to own her own business, to do something better than anybody else did before her? Was it the power? I find it interesting, especially because of her childhood, that most of her family members, well, we know about her mom and dad, were kind of in the positions of power. Like, yes, she could have had positive reinforcement for all of the things that she was doing throughout her whole life, from the childhood, teenagehood onwards, also contributed by the light sentences that she was getting. So again, when she was out on the streets, she would just return to it because she knew she could strike up a plea bargain, she could offer up some of the names of the clients, she could always get a lighter sentence than anybody else would. There is the whole form of low self-control, her addictions, her relationships, the fact that she wasn't in power in so many other instances in her personal life. But also when you look at her dad being a pediatrician, mom being a teacher, everybody in her family kind of having this legally powerful roles. And someone like Heidi might have translated that to sex work. Some people are willing to bring certain secrets to their grave. And for Heidi Fleiss, that might be where her power trip really lies. in the knowledge that she had all of this power over her business, both of her clients and the sex workers, and the knowledge that she still knows the names that you don't. XOXO, Gossip Girl. This is how you're ending your last video of the year, right? Great. Love it. Love that for me. I guess I just want to wish you Merry Christmas. This is not going out on Christmas, it's going out after Christmas. Merry New Year. You let me know what you think about a lady like Heidi Fleiss. Is this kind of business still doable? Is it doable for Heidi? Will she maybe have her application approved one day? And if not, who do you see running it? Who do you see in one such role? And do you see it at all? Like, what would be the selling point for something like this? What kind of research would somebody need to do to go to Nevada and start their own stud farm? What kind of thing would you use in order to sell it to women as this customer base? Because as a woman, you get it. Why would you pay some money to actually then spend petrol, go in the middle of nowhere, in a desert, in Nevada, to have somebody to sleep with you? I think, honestly, I think the potential here that she might have missed on is the whole privacy aspect of it. If her customer base was to be some women of power, you know, celebrities, where the discretion needs to be discussed, that might not want everybody in their business, that might be leading a busy life, might just want to go to this random ranch, have sex with the sex worker and then return home without anybody knowing it, I think that would be the selling point. You know, I watched Miss Sloane or Molly's Game, one of the Jessica Chastain movies. I think it's Miss Sloane. I have fixated ideas about the Jessica Chastain roles, but in that sense, would Heidi Fleiss be the right person to run something like this? Because there's a whole, again, aspect of publicity. Like, how do you keep these secrets? Or maybe because she doesn't snitch on people, she would be the perfect person to do it. Well, that is great. That was a great ramble. All of the conclusions have definitely been made, and you are ending this year on such a strong note. It was something. Was it strong? Probably not. Listen, have a happy new year. You really need to start scripting conclusions to this. No. No. Have a happy new year. And I shall be seeing you, hopefully, with one of the biggest cases, another deep dive, first thing in January. Do yourself some good, okay? Go and get off or something. Shut it. Go and get off is what she said at the end of a video, a true crime video. But listen, I mean, just enter the new year with an orgasm. Like, what else am I here to pass on as a message to the public? I am starting my shift in 10 minutes, so I have nothing smarter or better to say. I think that is a good way to exit this year. It was a shit year anyways. So yeah, an orgasm wouldn't hurt nobody. You know, just a couple of fingers. Maya, I will be seeing you next year. God, recommend me other topics like this. You know, if you want the conclusions to be this deep. Nobody will. Literally, not a single person. It's like you just convince them never to. See you in 2022. Mic check. You know how sometimes there is a clear sign that like you shouldn't be recording on that day? Today is one of those days and I'm still sitting down. I literally noticed that my battery is dead. What is this? Why is your skin peeling? Notice my battery is dead, right? Then I went to change it, put it to charge and put another battery in. What did I do? You know it. I put the exact same battery in and I was like, I mean, the fuck, so none of these two batteries is charged. And then I saw the other one on charge and it was on green, meaning it was fully charged. Exhilarating. This is the kind of storytelling that everybody's here for. Excuse me, okay. I know that this is not this type of medium because you can't show me shit, but look at your little fingers, please. Look at the one on your non-dominant hand and then the one on your dominant one. Ever since I got this iPad, like, it actually hurts when I hold it, because I hold it the exact same way I would hold my phone. Like, the whole thing is deranged. Look at this motherfucker, like, how much more twisted can it get? Do you do any exercises for your little fingers? You know how you do, like, for your, I don't know, pelvic floor if you are pregnant? Is that what it's called? I will not have children. It doesn't really matter for me. It matters in terms of, like, just understanding anatomy. Like, is there such thing as a pelvic floor? It sounds kind of like a hospital room, you know? Like a department where you go when you have children. Shut no. You were not posting this. This is the dumbest comment ever made. Okay, well, let's check how that microphone check worked. Some would argue that storytelling is the oldest profession in the book. Some that maybe it required builders, people in infrastructure. Yeah, you know, like the Brooklyn Bridge wasn't built in a day. We are going before Christ, everybody. Oh god, this is like the level of insanity I never thought I would reach. We are starting in 2400 before Christ. You know Christ? Yeah, this is before him. How do we know what happened then? We just bluff it. Imagine if yesterday was just all like a joke, somebody inventing a story. That is why storytelling is the oldest profession in the book. Lying is the oldest profession. Everybody lied from the get-go, and lying is indeed the oldest profession. You're joking, but Elizabeth Holmes's trial is happening as I am recording this. Also, I'm joking. You're talking to yourself in like, what, second person now? But lying truly did benefit a lot of people. You're like, how is lying a profession? Well, how many people actually made insane amount of money because they were good liars, because they were good at fraud? Lying equals fraud, you know? You steal, you lie, you defraud. Wow. Sick. Glad we had that out of the way. Can we continue now? You're literally at the first sentence in the script. First sentence. I mean, I'll put it on the screen. You let me know if you know any of the movies and the series that he has produced. Let's just have a sideline. No. I need to do an ego check. I sometimes need to do this, and you're gonna witness what done on the camera. Girl in the back, my inner thought. How many subscribers do you have? About 500 something, right? How can you shit over somebody else's work? What is this ego boost? People have described you so mean.